Nick Van Axel, also known as Nick the Quick, was a dynamic point guard known for his flashy style, clutch shooting, and ability to create plays. Van Axel burst onto the NBA scene with the Los Angeles Lakers, selected him 37th overall in the 1993 NBA draft. Despite being a second round pick, he quickly established himself as the team's starting point guard. His quick crossover, deep three-point shooting, and fearless playing style made him a fan favorite during the Lakers' rebuilding years. During his Lakers tenure, Van Exel averaged 14.9 points and 7.3 assists per game, earning an All-Star selection in 1998. He formed an exciting young core with Eddie Jones and became a leader during the pre-Shaq Kobe era. However, his tenure was also marked by occasional conflicts with coaches and officials. Nick Van Exel's time at the University of Cincinnati showed how one player can help transform a program. Nick was originally playing college basketball at Trinity Valley Community College. Then in 1991, he transferred to Cincinnati to play for Bob Huggins. And man, did he turn out to be perfect timing. The Bearcats were trying to become relevant again, and Van Exel was exactly what they needed. His junior year in 91-92 was like a preview of what was coming. He put up about 12 points a game, which is solid, but here's the crazy part. He helps lead Cincinnati to the Final Four. Think about that. The school hadn't been there since 1963. They end up losing to Michigan's Fab Five in the semifinals, but still, what a run. The team went on a 29-5 year, and suddenly everyone's talking about Cincinnati basketball again. But his senior year, that's when Nick really took off. He bumped the scoring average to 18 points per game, dropping about 5 assists, and was terrorizing teams from three-point range. He was shooting over 40% from deep, which was pretty impressive for that era. The team was rolling too. They went 25-5 and made the Elite Eight. Van Exel's played a really fearless style that would later become his trademark in the NBA. He didn't take long three-pointers that would drive Coach Huggins crazy, but they'd go in. He had this quick trigger on his jump shot and wasn't afraid of any big moment. The bigger the game, the better he played. All told, his Cincinnati teams went 56-10 over those 2 seasons. Ridiculous. He's basically helped put Cincinnati basketball back on the map. And get this, he did it all in just 2 years. Talk about making your time count. The impact he made there was huge. Van Exel, top players started looking at Cincinnati differently. Huggins would point to Nick and say, see, this is what we can do here. And his success helped build the program into what it's became in the 90s and in the 2000s. It's actually pretty wild to think that the second round NBA draft pick was once a college star who helped transform an entire program. But that's exactly what Nick Van Exel did at Cincinnati. He showed up, took them to the Final Four, developed into an NBA prospect, and left the program way better than he found it. Not a bad college career. Nick Van Exel's time with the Lakers, it was something special. You know those players who just capture the city's imagination? That was Nick in LA from 1993 to 1998. And the funny thing is, he wasn't even supposed to be that good. The Lakers got him with the 37th pick in 1993, and man, did that turn out to be a steal. He walked in as a rookie and basically said, this is my team now. Started running the offense right away and put up nearly 14 points a game. What made Nick so fun to watch was his style. He had this swagger about him. They called him Nick the Quick for a reason. He'd pull up for three-pointers in practically half court and the crowd would go absolutely nuts. The Great Western Forum would just hold its breath whenever he had the ball in clutch moments. He formed this amazing young backcourt with Eddie Jones, and they were like lightning on the court together. Those mid-1990s Lakers teams weren't championship contenders, but they were incredibly entertaining. Van Exel was dropping dimes, hitting crazy shots, and playing with his infectious energy that made basketball fun. Things got really interesting in 1996 when the Lakers brought in Shaq and Kobe. Now imagine being the point guard for those two. Nick actually handled it pretty well, had one of his best years dishing out 8.5 assists per game. He made his only All-Star team in his final Lakers season, 1997-98, which is like a perfect send-off. The stats were solid, about 15 points and 7 assists per game over his Lakers career, but they didn't tell the whole story. Van Exel was the bridge between Magic Johnson's era and the Shaq-Kobe dynasty. He kept Lakers basketball exciting during what could have been a pretty dull rebuilding years. Even today, when you talk to Lakers fans from that era, they just light up when you mention Nick Van Exel. He wasn't the greatest Laker ever to anything, but he was definitely one of the most exciting. That left-handed jumper, the way he talked trash, those crazy deep threes, he was just different, you know? And unfortunately, all things come to an end, and the Lakers traded him to Denver in 1998. But those 5 years, they were something special. Nick Van Exel might have not brought any championships to LA, but he sure brought a whole lot of excitement. So Nick lands in Denver in 1998 after the Lakers traded him, and he steps into a totally different situation. Instead of the bright lights of LA, he's now the main guy on a rebuilding Nuggets team. And you know what? He absolutely embraced it. His first season in Denver, he's just letting it fly, averaging about 16 points and 7.4 assists. But check this out, during the 99-2000 season, he really turns it up. He's dropping 17.7 points per game and throwing these incredible passes that would make you jump out of your seat. The team wasn't winning a ton of games, but Nick was playing some of his best basketball. Here's what was so fun about watching Van Exel in Denver. He had complete freedom to be himself. Remember those super deep threes he was famous for? In Denver, he was launching them from even further. His home crowd would go crazy every time he pulled up from like 28 feet, basically playing Steph Curry style before Steph was even in high school. The 2001-2002 season was particularly wild. He's putting up almost 21.4 points per game through 45 games before getting traded to Dallas. But here's the thing about his Denver years that people don't talk about enough. He became a real leader there. He was mentoring young players, taking big shots in crucial moments, and really maturing as a player. Sure, the team's record wasn't great, but Van Exel was playing some of the best basketball of his career. The funny part is, even though he was putting up those great numbers in Denver, it kind of flew under the radar because the team wasn't winning much. But if you go back and watch the highlights, you'll see some of the most spectacular plays of his career. He was doing things with the ball that would go viral today. The Denver chapter of Van Exel's career eventually came to an end when he was traded to the Mavericks in 2002. But those years in the Mile High City showed just how good he could be as a primary scorer and playmaker. It might not have been as glamorous as the Laker days, but man, it was just entertaining. Nick Van Exel's run with the Mavericks, it was shorter than his other stops, but wow, was it exciting. So Nick arrives in Dallas midway through the 2001-2002 season as part of his big trade, and he walks into an absolutely perfect situation. The Mavs already had an incredible offense with Steve Nash and Michael Finley and Dirk Nowitzki, and adding Van Exel just made them even more dangerous. It was like adding jet fuel to an already hot fire. He became the super-powered sixth man. Coming off the bench behind Nash, he'd enter the game and just light teams up. His first full season in Dallas was when things really got fun. The Mavs were just unstoppable offensively. They were running teams out of the gym. Van Exel was putting up 12.5 points per game in the regular season, but hold on to your hat, because the playoffs, that's when Nick Quick really showed up. Those 2003 playoffs were something else. Remember when he absolutely torched the Sacramento Kings in the second round? He went off. We're talking about games of 36 and 40 points. He was literally unstoppable at times. In that series, he averaged over 25 points per game coming off the bench. The Kings had no answer for him. The Mavs made it all the way to the Western Conference Finals that year, and even though they lost to the Spurs, Van Exel showed everyone he could still be a game changer. He was hitting those incredible trademark deep threes and making clutch plays and giving the Mavs the incredible spark off the bench. What made his time in Dallas so special was how perfectly he fit into their system. Even though his time in Dallas was pretty brief, those 2 seasons he really made his mark. He showed that he could adapt his game from being a starter to coming off the bench, and he proved that he could still be a major factor on a contending team. So after this amazing playoff run with Dallas, Nick gets traded to Golden State in 2003. The Warriors were, well, let's just say it, they weren't exactly championship contenders at the time, but they had the young, energetic team with guys like Jason Richardson and Mike Dinwiddie Jr., and they needed a veteran point guard to help guide them. Van Exel steps in as their starting point guard, and even though he wasn't quite the same Nick the Quick of old, he still had his moments where he'd make you jump out of your seat. He was putting up 12.6 points and 5.3 assists per game, which wasn't bad considering he was playing through injuries. Even though he wasn't at his peak anymore, he was still hitting those crazy deep three-pointers that made him famous. The funny thing about his Warrior stint was just that he had become a mentor figure. Here's this guy who had been known for his flashy, sometimes controversial player earlier in his career. Now he's teaching young guys the ropes. He was sharing all those tricks he learned from the Lakers and Nuggets those days as a younger player. Unfortunately, the season wasn't great overall for the team. They finished well out of the playoff race. And those nagging injuries were just starting to catch up with Nick. It was getting harder for him to play through those big minutes like he used to. The Warriors stint ended up being just a one-year stop in his career, but even though it wasn't the most successful season stat-wise, he still brought the Van Exel of flair to the Bay Area. Nick Van Exel's time with the Portland Trail Blazers, it was a quick stop near the end of his career. So after this year with Golden State, Nick lands with the Portland Trail Blazers in the 2004-2005 season. Now he was at 33 years old at this point, and those knees were really giving him trouble. His numbers this season weren't jaw-dropping, about 11 points and 4.3 assists per game. Instead of being a flashy showman, he was more like that wise old veteran. One of the more interesting parts of his Portland stint was his relationship with Damon Stoudemire. You had these two smaller guards who played with such heart, sharing those point guard duties. They weren't the most conventional backcourt, but they made it work. Unfortunately, injuries kept bothering him throughout the season. He'd have games where he looked like the Van Exel of old, then others where you could tell his body just wasn't cooperating. The Blazers finished out of the playoffs that year, and it ended up being Nick's last full season as a regular rotation player. His final NBA stop was with the San Antonio Spurs. It was kind of a bittersweet ending to a really entertaining career. Nick signs with the Spurs for the 2005-2006 season, and on paper it seemed perfect, right? The defending champs adding a veteran guard who could still hit big shots. Plus, this was his chance to finally get that championship ring that had eluded him for his entire career. But here's the thing. By this point, Van Exel's knees were really giving him trouble. He wasn't Nick the Quick anymore, more like Nick the Vet. He was playing behind Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili, coming in short bursts when the team needed him, some outside shooting or some veteran savvy. The numbers tell the story of his final season, about 5.5 points per game in just 53 games. Here's this guy who was known for being his flashy, sometimes controversial player throughout his career, and he ends up with the most fundamental, no-nonsense team in the league. But Coach Pop actually loved having him around. Van Exel's basketball IQ was really high, and he totally bought into the Spurs system. Even though he wasn't playing big minutes, he was like another coach on the bench. You'd see him talking to younger guys, sharing all that knowledge from his 13 years in the league. That's what made his final season special in its own way. Unfortunately, the storybook ending didn't quite happen. The Spurs got knocked out in the playoffs by the Mavericks, and Van Exel decided it was time to hang it up. It's kind of poetic that his career ended with the Spurs. From being this ultra-confident second-round pick who played with so much flash and attitude with the Lakers to finishing up as a veteran role player on a fundamentally sound Spurs team. It showed how much he had grown as a player and a person. While he may not have achieved the superstar status some predicted early in his career, he remains remembered as an exciting player who helped bridge the gap between the Lakers' Showtime era and their later championship teams. His playing style influenced many future guards, and his ability to create excitement on the court made him a memorable figure in 1990s NBA basketball. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate you guys. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this video, and stay safe.